we go.
All right, excellent. Can we give a warm round of applause for Mr. Chris Gatford? Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas. That was a saving grace. Not sure if I was going to have to bring up any of my jokes any further after that. Anyhow, look, thanks very much. It's actually quite exciting. This is, despite coming to AusCERT for over 17 years and presenting for a fair few of them, I've never actually done a main talk before. I've always taken the opportunity to do tutorials. So quite exciting. 20 years in IT security, and I guess I kind of call myself a white hat hacker. These days, I'm probably a little less technical than I used to be back in the day. But hacking is not about actual technical skill. Hacking, in my opinion, and in some others, it is about the bending of things to basically solve a problem. And it's out-of-the-box thinking. And I still kind of get to do that on a regular basis, which I quite enjoy. I also like to bend the rules, because rules are there in our world, in the hacking culture, to be bent. And I thought that was quite an apt one there with Lisa standing in front of the signs. Because we are faced with so much security theatre. We make hackers look, sound so great and scary and clever, when in reality, it's much less exotic than that. But I will say this though, the Mr. Robot TV series, what a great TV series. Hands in the audience if you watch Mr. Robot. All right, 30%, I'm preaching to the choir. One of the great things about Mr. Robot, by the way, is that they actually had somebody from industry and our culture helping them make sure all of those techniques and tools were actually technically accurate. And at some point there was ransomware deployed at Mr. Robot on Evil Corp. The problem is, because we make it look so hard and complex, the powers that be who hand us down our budgets or give us our resources or get tired of us telling them we need more money or more effort, etc., in our organisations, and certainly here in Australia, means really we struggle. We struggle to do too much. We struggle to do too much with too little. Or we just give up, because, to be quite honest, I'm a little irritated. I am copying and pasting the same findings, job after job. And largely, it is because we are asleep at the wheel. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish we could write some new novel and interesting findings. But, nonetheless, it's interesting. We also seem to really not think about the messaging that we send out. We don't think about the impact. So, my talk today on ransomware, the technical debt collector, kind of circles back, and we're going to talk about a few examples. I'm going to talk about some of the global stuff. But as a, self-confessed geek, when you think about ransomware and the fact that they take our digital assets and then they sell them back to us, what can I use to signify this actual task or this actual process that ransomware collectors are doing, but still make it like a bit of humor in there so I can get management to take a bit of attention on it? Well, I bring you the Jawa. The actual perfect Star Wars analogy for ransomware. Because these little guys, they run around, they steal your stuff, and then they try and sell it back to you in Star Wars. Perfect. So it's spot the Jawa game, guys. Now, this all started for me when COVID hit. I could see that there was going to be quite a lot of more malicious activity coming up. So I was thinking to myself, okay, well, what are we going to do about this as an organisation? How are we going to help our client base? And I knew the problem. I knew the problem was going to be basically two major things. users, because they don't listen. We tell them to choose good quality passwords. We tell them to make sure that they're using MFA on everything, but unfortunately they don't. And we don't monitor for the gaps. I also knew the other problem. The reason why we don't monitor for the gaps is because, as I said before, we're under-resourced and overutilized. And that's because we struggle continuously to get appropriate resourcing. Gee, put your hand up if you've got more than enough money for your IT security budget. I just want to see who was buying drinks tonight. I thought a lot of people probably were very familiar with ransomware, and I was surprised. As I've sort of crept slowly more and more out of being in technical land, I thought, it was a pretty common thing. But even last night at a function, I was actually surprised that, people didn't understand some of the key concepts or some of the key things. So let me take everybody back to level 1 on this. This is not an overly technical talk, but it's a really good backgrounder, I thought. Ransomware is easy. It is no different to previous compromises and all the history of various things. In fact, the history and the origins of ransomware actually started, interestingly, at the same time that we just heard Brian Hay was tackling guys streaking across the football field. 1989. 1989 was the first piece of ransomware. And back in those days, you didn't have Bitcoin. So after you were infected, you had to send $189 to a PO box in Panama, and they would send you a floppy disk with the decryption key. So it's been around for quite a while. Obviously, it massively increased when we introduced Bitcoin, the ability to do a lot of trading and get the information, send the funds globally. And everyone thinks it's untraceable. Bitcoin is very traceable. Sometimes there are things that screw up the tracing process, like Bitcoin tumblers. It's a whole other chat. But so it's very traceable still, but it's obviously been facilitated by Bitcoin. And then we think about the origins. And everyone thinks, well, where do all these ransomware attacks from? There's all these different group names. And it's breaking intelligence now. We're pretty confident they come from here. And in fact, in recent times, 80% of all of the known traffic that's malicious in relation to ransomware gangs has been coming from Russia. And a large portion also from Ukraine, which is obviously a little bit interrupted at the moment. They've stopped even trying to obfuscate the originating IP addresses and DNS names. They really just don't care anymore. So when you start looking into the statistics for this, it is incredibly scary. Just in 2021 alone, 1,500 victims, give or take. And I believe this is very underreported. And I'll show another slide in a second where we looked into one of the other groups. It's incredible if you think about it. Let's just assume Conti there and Lockbit, which are the two biggest ransomware gangs that are currently operating at the moment. If they were sort of averaging around 500 victims a year at an average, and this is a lowball amount of $100,000 we're talking around 40 to 50 million US dollars per ransomware group there per year. That's a lot of cyber insurance premiums. So, massive amounts of money underreported, and certainly some great headlines to date. The method that the ransomware gangs use is initial access, then facilitation by the ransomware group, and then the double extortion method, which is them publishing and encrypting the information as well. Now, in the sort of experience when we were talking to victims, they don't care about the encrypted stuff because most people with reasonable, IT skill have good backups. They had good recovery processes. They absolutely care about the published data. That is what scares the bejesus out of all management. Actually, Zscaler had a really good image on this, so I borrowed it from them and gave them props down below there. So on the very left-hand side, we see the initial access, and that is still coming from the most common attack vectors, which we've technically had solutions for years, maybe even decades in some cases. So we have it coming in via spam, phishing, brute forcing or stolen credentials, specifically to RDP. Yes, shock horror, RDP, still well and alive out there, and certainly in the Australian internet space. And then we've seen more recently them picking up. They actually pick up new vulnerabilities quicker than internal IT and get out there and exploiting and working out who the victims are. Super quick at picking up a new exploit, weaponizing, and then using it to find victims. So that's the initial access. Now, once they're in the network, they're going to do absolutely the same things that other malicious people do, and or when you've got security consultants or people performing penetration testing, as you do on a 6-month basis. Nod, nod. So when you're doing that, when they're doing that kind of activity, they're actually not generally quiet because they're trying to do this relatively quickly and get the data they're after and out. So it should show up. Now, one of the groups actually use pen testing, or a couple of pen testing tools, but one specifically called Bloodhound. Has anyone ever seen Bloodhound? Cool, a few hands. Bloodhound tells you what credentials you have, and if you logged onto the system here and pulled off some of the hashes that are currently resident in that workstation, what access you could achieve. It's like a map for being naughty in a Windows Active Directory environment. Super handy. So, they perform their network reconnaissance and their lateral movement detection. They find the data that they want to take. And they're looking for sensitive stuff. These guys are quite clever. They're not messing around. They're not taking, boring stuff. They're going after the board papers. They're going after the payroll. They're going after your supplier invoices. And then, of course, then comes the encryption. Now, at this extortion tactic 2 point, this is when it starts hitting the fan, because that's generally when most organizations notice they're getting locked out of systems. Data's already gone. That's game over. When you start seeing encrypted systems, we know that it's too late. And of course, then they move to doing other things like threatening DDoS, and then of course, if you haven't or decide not to pay the ransom, eventually your data is leaked publicly. They put a sample up just enough to pique your interest and get the media attention as well, because they want that undue pressure on you. So this is the process that most of them follow. Here are a few examples. By the way, my approach today was, if you're a client of ours or someone we've done work for, we're kind of bound by our confidentiality clauses in our proposal, so I'm obviously not naming any of our clients. However, all of this is publicly available. So my approach to this is, well, I'm just going to share the existing already publicly available data, unless it's a client. So my conscience is clear. When you go to a disclosure page, this is kind of what they look like. Here's a couple here. They're sort of talking about the actual organization. They tell you what their annual turnover, how many employees they've got, the actual sample, or in this case, the actual full data link there. And in fact, sometimes they password protect it, so it's less likely to be discovered, presumably by the file sharing spaces, the solutions themselves. Other times, it's a bit more basic. The more entry-level ransomware groups mix it up with good old directory browsing. So now you can cherry pick your data, but it also makes it very easy to also scrape the entire site and pull down all of the files themselves. And as you can see by the file names, the directory names here, again, they've chosen some very interesting folders. We've got directors, we've got department data, we've got accounts, And yes, I did grey out some of these ones because I thought it was probably prudent to not identify this organisation. And we just heard earlier, who saw the Brett Winterford talk? So much irony with Brett giving that talk, wasn't it? Brett used to be an absolute cracker reporter, reporting exactly on that kind of thing. Now he's on the other side. It was good to see him squirm. No, he's a good friend, Brett, and it was a very interesting talk. But Lapsus, which attacked Okta, and we heard him talking through, some of the things that they're doing are also slightly different again. They are using Telegram as opposed to a dark website. So they're publishing the data quite quickly and fast. And look, here's a screenshot that I took with the LG domain hashes. The domain hashes for all of LGE are being dumped by the Lapsus group. Now, from an incident response perspective, if you've just lost your Active Directory domain hashes, that's a real problem. Like that's like a month of work just to go around. And end users are fine to change, but all those service accounts, all the impact is huge. And because Lapsus is also using torrent files in that bottom screenshot there, it means it's very hard to do a takedown. There isn't a central point anymore. So as we see ransomware groups moving to doing things like this, it's going to become much more difficult for organizations. By the way, I've got some cracker Jawa pictures. They just keep on giving. So the first group that I'll walk you through is Conti, one of the most notorious groups. Around 808 to 1,000 victims so far. The US State Department had some good information on this because, let's face it, the US is the main target of all of these ransomware groups. If we look at the numbers there, approximately $80 million to $150 million US that has been extracted by this ransomware group. These guys are living large, so it shouldn't be that hard to spot them. That's based on an average, again, of 100 or 150K USD per victim. There we are, 1.9%. But that 1.9% is still a massive impact for the organizations that have been affected. So the US got a little bit pissed off with Conti, and they said, okay, here's $15 million as a reward for the arrest of the Conti ransomware group members. Now, most of these guys are in Russia or Georgia or somewhere in Ukraine, so the likelihood of actually ever getting these people arrested is very low, unless they're stupid enough to travel, which has happened actually quite a few times, funnily enough. So, who knows? Recently, they took down the couple of networks in Costa Rica. They declared a national emergency from ransomware. When Conti had a little bit of an internal political problem, like an unhappy employee, he threw his toys and then did some doxing of their methods and their tools and leaked them online. And then because of the conflict at the moment, people picked up those tools and some of the things and then started targeting Russia organizations with the actual tools as retaliation. It's kind of funny. Here's the Conti news page. You've probably seen some screenshots of this in the past. At the time that I took this, we can see there was 3 victims there. Finite Recruitment have been in the media talking about their ransomware incident. If you think about it though, if you're going to ransomware and you're going to take files, taking a recruitment company or lawyers or medical data has massive impact. Like, think of all those resumes that just got scooped up by them. It's full of useful PII, of course, and helps you create a profile. So this is the Conti news page. When you go to a dark website, obviously people like to make it sound mysterious with the .onion. You can just download the Tor browser, or a little side hack. There are a couple of clear text, clear web to dark web redirection services. So if you throw a .ws or a .wy on the end of a .onion address, you'll be able to see it in the standard browser. Doesn't stop you from any malware, but you can still get there. Conti also had a really interesting one in that they decided to list as a victim Graph Diamonds. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Graph. Anyway, that really luxurious diamond brand that none of us have probably ever bought from in this room here. The problem is, they didn't actually look at the sample data that they put up about the ransomware group, didn't look at the data they actually put up. And when they put the data up, unfortunately, it had a lot of Saudi royal family members buying jewelry, not necessarily for their wives and girlfriends. So it got a little bit embarrassing. The ransomware group got a little bit worried about losing arms, hands, legs. And so they actually apologized. It's like a soap opera online. They actually apologized on their website and said, look, sorry for causing any inconvenience. So what do we got? Oh, yes. All right. So the guy that was a little bit disgruntled, he actually leaked it. Some researchers did some really cool stuff on this. This came from Checkpoint, and they could work out their organizational charts because they're quite organized. So, we've got the red team up there in the research development, the developers, the reverse engineers, and the third-party service operators. Down below, you've got recruitment, those fun guys in HR. The affiliates. So the way that a lot of this works is that these guys are basically hiring people to get the initial access or buying the initial access. And of course, you've got business development, top right-hand corner there, and then finance. Finance, I love this, finance-money laundering. So it's important. So they're very organized, much more than we would actually think. Lockbit. 12,000 victims / self-reported. This is funny because everyone assumed there were around 1,000, and they're like, no, we're a better ransomware group than those Conti guys, look. And so based on their 12,000 victims, the way they self-disclosed this, though, was actually taking a screenshot of their own PHP backend and going, look, in our victims / builds table, we've got 12,000 rows. So we've got far more victims than Conti, which is, kind of fun. If you were making over $1 billion in ransomware, surely you'd be in the cloud with a Microsoft.NET instance, not running PHP. So Lookbit have been a bit more active, certainly here in Australia. As we can see, the US, not as much as Conti, but 2.3% in Australia. This is what their leak page looks like. They have a really irritating file download view. I think I've got that later on. Lapsus, all right, just drilling in. We've already talked about them a little bit, by the way. That Jawa picture down there, that was actually quite a good costume out of all the costume ones I saw. It was a good one. Lapsus are around 10 or so victims at this stage. It's hard to tell. They're a bit obviously new. One of the guys obviously got arrested also recently. I think I've got a slide on there. But the other victims outside of Okta were Ubisoft, Samsung, Microsoft, and of course, more recently, the Brazilian various governments that have also been hit by, well, government departments have been hit in Brazil. What is interesting about Lapsus mostly is they're less trying to get affiliates. They're more trying to get the insider. They want to buy their access. They want someone to install or give them VPN credentials. This really spins it a little bit, right? So you think about it, inside most organizations, there's going to be, a disgruntled, malicious employee somewhere. And when this becomes more widespread, and I see this probably the path of where it's going to go in the future, we're kind of stuck. Because it's very hard to defend against a malicious insider that already has access. They advertise their jobs on that Twitter handle down there. It could be a Telegram handle. But Lapsus jobs. So it's interesting. And these are all trivial things to actually look for if you're running good InfoSec solutions for unusual behavior. For example, if originating IP addresses for the VPN are coming out from an unusual location, that should be a flag, right? And that other behaviors should then generate an alert. So all these things are overcomable, but we're not used to it. And because they got one Oxford teenager who I doubt had that significant role, to be honest, but arrests really aren't going to make any difference. People are making good money out of this. That was one on LG hashes. Okay, global examples. Accenture, checking time. Accenture in August 2021 had a compromise. Everyone was really interested to see this because they are obviously a global security consultancy. I mean, consultancy with some security occasionally. They were on the front page of Lockbit for a while. They said, no, they don't have our data. And they go, yes, we do. And they had to backtrack about 2 months after they came out and said, yep, no, like they didn't get anything. They went, okay, yeah, they got something. Because shortly after this compromise, these customers who ran Accenture airport software also got done by the same ransomware group. Wasn't a coincidence. Yeah, so they eventually had to admit the data breach. If there was one thing I could iterate, and this is not because I'm trying to promote a talk I'm in tomorrow, but get your media stuff sorted. Never let your media and marketing guys respond without it getting cleared by the IT and technical department. Because it just gets absolutely smashed by analysts when it hits the media by people that want to tear it apart. Colonial. Now this really changed a lot of things in ransomware land, but not so much for us here in Australia. When the Colonial pipeline effectively was shut down for weeks because of ransomware. Funny enough, I think we were at AusCERT at the time it was happening, or was it shortly after? It was such a significant event. And in the US, they have moved heaven and earth. The resources in the US for people suffering from ransomware are really extensive now. It's really good to see. It caused massive mayhem. We had news all over the place about it. This caused real disruption. Real disruption. I actually even heard, unfortunately, somebody dying because they filled up a plastic bag with petrol and left it in their car. And then it caught on fire. And they were driving along, caught on fire, and they perished. This is DarkSide. This is their job advert. This is posted to one of the cyber gang sites where they were trying to recruit. What I wanted to draw attention to this is, they're not messing around. I wish I could put job ads out like this. They're talking about the technical stuff that they want, but we don't want someone who doesn't follow the rules. So look, we're not going after funeral services, public sector, non-profit, and healthcare, please. Of course, they don't always follow those rules particularly well because they often don't actually understand what they're targeting. Can you join us? Yes, there's the interview process. They did actually want, I think it's somewhere in here, I'm not sure if I actually showed it, but they wanted examples of the previous places you'd ransomwared for other affiliate groups to help speed up the process. Graham Cluley, what a great headline. So after DarkSide had done the Colonial pipeline, they, as Graham suggested, would be shitting themselves because everyone in the world would have been looking for them. There would have been massive amounts. Biden poured a ton of money into it, and they became, public enemy number one. So that was also a little humorous insight into them. They did pay $5 million in ransom to DarkSide, and then DarkSide pretty much disbanded. So that one was really pivotal because it's changed a lot, which is going to flow on to us here in the US, and hopefully the Australian government will pick up some of the initiatives. Because if we don't, we're going to end up like this poor person was in Germany. the hospital was so disrupted by ransomware on their systems, somebody who was on their way or was critically ill had to be redirected to another hospital. And unfortunately, she died on the way because it was a much longer trip. People keep paying the ransom, of course. This was a large insurance firm, ironically, that also issues cyber insurance. They paid $40 million. Every time we pay the fines, we're just encouraging the business model. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do when COVID hit around ransomware? And I was like, okay, I'm going to start seeing if I can monitor all of the victims in Australia. And then, because one of our clients got done by it at the time, and I was like, okay, well, they didn't really know what to do, have anybody to talk to, etc. You try and ring any of the reporting lines in Australia, and to be honest, they're pretty ineffective and not actually giving any proper advice, in my opinion. So this was me. I was like, shit, this is going to be okay. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll give it a crack. Flex the old technical muscles again. Because I thought everybody, like, this would be sorted, right? Like, I just thought, everybody have access to resources to do this kind of stuff. When governments can help. No, they can't. So, all right, and no one was doing this. All right, well, how hard is it? Okay, so we need to start monitoring various internet channels. So I kind of did the research, some great resources out there, worked out how to monitor the various groups, where to get the source list from, how to join some of the chat sessions, and I came up with 66 ransomware groups to keep tabs on. Out of the 66 ransomware groups, every time there was an Australian victim, I would do my best to ring them. As they came up on the sharing sites, I would ring them and offer complimentary help and assistance. Because we didn't want to profiteer out of other people's misery at a time that's so important. So I rang them up and I would speak to whoever the seniorest person I could find on LinkedIn, using a couple of plugins on LinkedIn. You get their direct dial details. That's another story. And then you ring them and you go, oh, look, can we help? And you can imagine some are receptive, others are not. Never try to ring a senior lawyer of a lawyer company that's currently got all the systems down. It wasn't the best response I got back, I have to say. I think he mentioned something about suing several times. 103 victims in Australia since the start of 2022. I think about a few weeks ago when I last updated the statistic. 103. The ransomware groups, the big ones, Lockbit and Conti, 16 and 15, respectively, in Australia. I actually was really surprised at some of the breakdown of this. We've got legal, construction, and health. Now, they already said they're not targeting health, a lot of them, but they don't really care. They say that, but they do. New South Wales Labor was one that caught my attention. Yeah. So the Labor Party in New South Wales got compromised. They were done by the Avedon Group. They have since closed down. What was interesting is they went off the list very quickly. Like, very quickly. Like, they were there for less than 12 hours. And I was thinking to me, did they pay the ransom? Did they have a whip round the New South Wales Labor political party and to actually pay the ransom? But it turned out later on that they just realised, oh no, as a political company, they might get us a bit too much heat, and they just dropped it. But all the data was still up there and online. In fact, it's still circulating around in some of the trading forums. This caused ACSC to do an alert. So they published this little alert out that said, be on the lookout for an embedded public key to perform AES 256 encryption on all file data, and to keep an eye out for Windows scheduled tasks to establish persistence. That's not helpful. Like, we need more direct actions. We need, hey, go and look at these things. It exists. It's all there. Macquarie Health Corporation, another very public one. This is still up on the site. They haven't disclosed the data, but just in case you're wondering, will change the face of Australian data privacy laws when this does eventually drop. 225 gigabytes of files. 67 of those gigabytes of those files, or 62 gigabytes of those files, sorry, is actually patient data. That's going to hit at some point, and that's going to have a massive impact. Maybe less of an impact, but still be very topical in the media. We're all sitting here watching this one. Jetstar was compromised by the Quantum Group. They've taken 40 gig of data. Quantum Group haven't released it yet, but we're all still waiting for it. Last couple of things. Transport company in Australia, we rang them. They got done by phishing, managed to help them out. That was good. A manufacturing company. And what we noticed about this manufacturing company, other people around the world that were all actually in the same industry, very specific, had also been recently named as victims. And we worked out the common denominator by actually talking to the other victims as well, they're international, was one vendor. This one vendor had their help desk compromised, and they were using some awful remote desktop solution and just remoting into those guys' clients and then just ransomwaring those guys. And just encrypting all their data. It was really interesting. Retail, eGregor, that was just an RDP being exposed to the internet. Finance group by Conti, that was actually malware, so it was an attachment to an email, that particular one. A rental business in Australia, that was when the exchange vulnerabilities came out. So we were really smashed by those exchange vulnerabilities in Australia, and the ransomware groups took good advantage of that. And more malware for an architect firm that we also walked with. But you know, all of this is just generating more insurance talk. But we've started seeing pushback. This article actually suggests there is now pushback by the collective CISOs in Australia saying, yeah, it's a bit of a waste of time now. Because then so many exclusions that they're not going to pay for. So this is when we go, well, excuse me, management guys, let's not renew our cyber insurance. Let's put it into IT. Let's put it into IT security and get some more resources and more people. Possible solutions. And the reason why I've got this Jawa picture is because these solutions have been around as long as she has. It's not hard. And if we don't do them, we won't arrest people like this guy. The American CISA.gov site has some excellent ransomware resources. It all comes back to stopping phishing. Stopping internet-facing vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, not letting that malware in there in the first place, and making sure we, as we heard with Okta, manage our third parties and our managed service providers. And of course, hardening our environments. I wish I could say something different that's wow and flashy about how we can stop this, but it's not rocket science. We just have to do our bread and butter things more frequently and better, so people don't die and we don't bring down organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Looking at the questions, there aren't any related to the talk, just some issues again with the stream. Any questions around the room? We'll have a few minutes. Oh, there's one over here.
Thanks, mate. Hi, Chris. I'd like to ask you about, obviously a lot of us know what has to be done in theory to manage the vulnerabilities that lead to ransomware. One of the barriers I've found moving from larger to smaller organizations is the ubiquitous MSP. And having to deal with a set of conflicting priorities and also the unfortunately ubiquitous remote monitoring management RMM software, which I think you alluded to as having their clients hit. Do you see that type of software as being a future vector for that? And how would you also think we could better approach managing MSPs and their need for access along with their potentially limited technical ability?
That's a good question. So we've already seen instances of MSPs being the root of the compromise. I talked about one briefly that we saw there was related to a particular industry. We've just got to keep them honest. I'm trying to remember which US official said this, trust but verify, as we also now see with Okta from Brett this morning. I think you've just got to be more active in managing those third parties. I see it all the time, and I'm also on the other side, right? I'm the one doing the security testing, producing the compliance report, the pen test report, and saying, yep, this, we tested it on this day, and here are the risks. And a lot of organizations just take that and go, okay, thanks, we'll trust you, cheers. But you've got to do your own testing. You can't take them verbatim. You've got to surprise them with tests. You've got to put security penalties. You've got to have penalties in your contract, right? So you can hurt them at the dollar point if they're not doing their job properly. I think that's a good start.
Oh, we're back.
Thanks, Chris. Nice session. I wanted to understand from your experience if you have seen any changes in ransomwares, organizations moving on to the cloud. Does it make them less would it make them more secure against attack?
Okay, good question. So for those of you who didn't hear that, is moving to the cloud making you less susceptible to ransomware? No. And the reason being is your end user still needs to access the data. It's often your end user that's getting compromised, and then the data that they had access to being siphoned out and used as part of the ransomware process. So no, unfortunately, if you can get rid of your users, you might have a chance, but...
I think we might need them. Were there any other questions in the room?
Just wondering if you're open to collaboration with your Ransomware Australia tracking project.
Sure.
Working with other companies that can add to that for you.
Sure. That's always happy to have a conversation. Awesome. All right, look, guys, thanks very much for your time. If you need to ask me any questions walking around, just hit me up. I'd be happy to answer anything else. Cheers.